Hi, I'm Lynette Zimmerman, Executive Director of Liberty Hall Academic Center and Exhibition Hall, and Acting Director of Kean Galleries. Now today we are at Liberty Hall Academic Center and Exhibition Hall with an exhibit called Voting Moments of Change. The mission of Kean Galleries is to talk about relevant issues and connect those topics with the students and the public. Now this year, being a little bit different due to COVID-19, we are only focused on connecting with students. So it felt particularly important to talk about voting and voting rights, because not everyone has always had the right to vote. Actually, a majority of our population has not. So one way we connect with students is talking about these relevant topics. And today, you'll see Voting Moments of Change is certainly one. So the right to vote is quite powerful. We must always work to maintain our right to vote. As you will see throughout time, the right to vote has been lost by some and fought for and regained. So it's not a given. The earliest elections were cast on paper ballots, party tickets. So each election was maintained and executed by the states. And each state only did a few things, right? They picked the quality of paper, the size of the paper, and what it was going to look like. Each paper ballot was specific to the party that you identified with. So now we see what we call a blanket ballot with everybody's everything on there. Republicans, Democrats, but in the late 18th century and 19th century, they were ruled by the parties. Each party created the paper ballot, the paper ticket. So you can imagine fraud was part of the deal. The ballot boxes were not secured. We'll take a look at some of the examples of ballot boxes used in the 19th century. Typically, you would receive your party ticket, you would make your selections if you were a white male who owned property and had resided in a certain area for a particular period of time. You would cast your vote. But these ballot boxes were not secure. There was constant rifling and mismanagement and distrust of the system. So change was inevitable. So in New Jersey, women actually gained the right to vote in the late 18th century. Many of them did meet the qualifications. They owned property, they lived in a certain area for a particular amount of time. One of our manuscripts in the Liberty Hall collection, which is housed here at the Special Collections Research Library and Archive, is a power of attorney document. Now this is Susan Ursin Nimsevich. This is her granting power of attorney to her son, Peter Kean. This is part of the Livingston Kean family, the property that we're sitting on today. William Livingston was New Jersey's first elected governor. Now this document here gives Peter Kean the power of attorney to vote on her behalf, on Susan's behalf, and to make decisions on her behalf, even though she was the rightful owner of the property. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the electorate nearly doubled in the United States. Knowing that voter fraud was running rampant, government officials took the opportunity to institute new practices. They incorporated the blanket ballot, and they actually took on the responsibility of printing it instead of letting the political parties print their own. The government also established voting machines. Counting the ballots became formalized and not dependent upon the parties. So this eliminated much of the fraud that was occurring at the beginning of the formation of the nation. Most of the nation was disenfranchised during this time period in the late 1800s, early 1900s. In 1866, the Civil Rights Act was passed. Most of us think of the Civil Rights Act as 1965 and all the work that went into that effort, but it actually started in 1866. African Americans won the right to vote through the 15th Amendment. However, they faced much discrimination. Poll taxes, literacy tests, any form of discrimination you can think of, they experienced. Thomas Mundy Peterson was the first African American to vote after the passage of the 15th Amendment. The election was concerning a town charter in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Women did not have the right to vote. Those states that did grant women the right to vote and enfranchise them was typically for a short period of time. Once the leaders who were in power got what they wanted, they eliminated those rights. By the 1950s, the civil rights movement had galvanized the nation. Congress had passed the Civil Rights Act in 1957, 1960, and 1964. In 1965, everything came to a head. A peaceful protest in Selma, Alabama, turned violent, becoming known as Bloody Sunday. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was such a shift in power from the states to the federal government. It was immediately challenged in the courts in 1965 through 1969. Following the Voting Rights Act of 1965, there were additional key moments in time where voting rights and practices were changed. Following the Vietnam War, the voting age was set at 18. In 1776, New Jersey was quite progressive. They granted women the right to vote, as well as African Americans. Now keep in mind, this was short-lived. This right was taken away in 1807, but the whole reason behind granting these groups the right to vote was for power. Those in power were three different groups: the Populists, the Federalists, and the Republicans, all vying for control. They leveraged the votes of these minority groups to build up their own power suites. Over time, New Jersey stripped away those powers. It wasn't until 1920 that they were fully regained. Lucy Stone from New Jersey was one of the premier suffragists. She's often lost to history, a footnote, if you will, compared to others who are more notably known: Alice Paul, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. These individuals, history marked. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, for instance, actually voted in New Jersey in Tenafly. It was an illegal vote, but she did attempt to do it to prove a point that women were educated and able to vote. Lucy Stone, an interesting character, spoke eloquently in front of Congress and the state legislature about taxation without representation. In 1857, she refused to pay her taxes. She was a property owner, she was well educated, and she refused to pay her taxes, which caused a great deal of issue. She claimed it was taxation without representation. She was not allowed to vote. She had no voice. So why should she pay taxes? One of the pieces in our collection is from 1868, and it's a pamphlet Lucy Stone wrote. She penned this pamphlet to offer her recommendations on why women should vote. Another interesting name in New Jersey history, Florence Dwyer. She served in the House of Representatives as a congresswoman in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s. She was a progressive woman for her time, identified as a Republican. However, she was fiscally conservative but socially liberal. She cared very deeply about civil rights and maintaining the rights of all groups of individuals. She took her job very seriously and worked diligently to secure and ensure those rights were never given away. This timeline is unique. It's unique to New Jersey and New Jersey suffrage movement. And we've taken a great deal of time to pull names out of history that you may not remember or have ever heard of. These individuals worked incredibly hard to procure their rights for women, for African Americans, and for many different disenfranchised groups. So it's important as you go through the timeline to really take note of these people. Google them, find out more about them, come to our research library and investigate and discover these individuals that truly had an impact. In the recent past, key moments in time would be in 1993, when the government identified an opportunity to register voters using the Motor Vehicle Act. This allowed individuals who were obtaining a license or doing any sort of formal paperwork with their vehicles to register to vote. 2009 was another key moment in time. This allowed military personnel to vote overseas. In 2018, New Jersey restored voting rights for convicted felons out on probation. This is a key moment in our recent past. President Obama said it best: democracy is messy, but it's the best option. I hope you enjoy Voting, Moments of Change, our recent exhibit here at the Liberty Hall Academic Center and Exhibition Hall.